Hi everyone, welcome to Jawaras. Let's continue our discussion of Spring Core, and in that also currently we are discussing about dependency injection inside Spring. In this video we are going to talk about lazy initialized beans. What that means is the bean will be initialized whenever it is required. So normally what happens that Spring container initializes all the beans at the startup times. The good point of that is that if we initialize all the beans at the startup time, then we will know what is the error, if there is any error in initialization of any bean. But if we use lazy initialization and if there is any exception or there is any error in the initialization of that bean, we will all be able to find that only at the runtime whenever that bean will be required. Sometimes it may be costly to initialize a bean, and what we want is the bean should be initialized lazily. That means only when we access that bean or whenever the bean is required. I have created a project here, Spring Core E05 lazy initialized beans. In the pom.xml file, I have configured the file to use Java version 17, and I have defined one configuration here is spring.version and value is 6.0.11, and this is the spring context dependency, and we already know that we need this dependency in order to work with spring IOC container and beans, and version we are using this variable which is 6.0.11. So you don't need to memorize all these code word adding the spring context dependency. You can search on the web or spring context maven and you will find this code. So that's it about the dependency. So we don't need any other dependency, so I will close this pom.xml file. I have few Java files already created. One is main.java file. Inside this file, we have a main method. So this will be the entry point of our application. Then we have author controller. So generally, controller means it will be responsible for accepting the incoming requests and sending back the response to the user. So we have author controller here, and this author controller has one dependency here, which is author service, and we have this constructor here, which will print whenever this constructor is being called. It will print this author controller colon colon constructor here. Then we have a setter method for author service here, and we have a toString method. Then we have author service here. Author service has dependency on author repository, and here as well in the constructor we are printing one line. So we will know whenever this constructor is being called. And we have a set repository method to initialize the author repository for this service, and we have a toString method. And in the author repository we don't have any dependencies. In the constructor we are just printing out something console. So on the high level, uh, author controller has dependency on author service, and author service has dependency on author repository. So let's go to main and let's initialize the application context. So application context will be new class path XML application context, since we will define the metadata configuration using XML file, and the XML file name is beans.xml. So this is the beans.xml file. Now let's get the author controller from the application context. So author controller will be context.getBean author controller dot class. Let's get author service as well. Author service will context.getBean author service dot class, and let's get author repository as well. Context.getBean author repository dot class, and let's print out everything controller and then service and then print out the repository. And let's print out something after initialization of application context. Let's print out this, that application context has been initialized. We'll print this text and let's run the application and see what we get. So we got an error here. No qualifying bean of type controllers.author controller, because we are accessing the bean of type author controller here, but we have not defined that bean inside configuration file. So let's do that. So let's define bean here. So class will be controllers.author controller. Let's define another bean here. Then class will be controllers. Sorry, class will be services.author service. And let's define another bean here, and class will be repositories.author repository. And let's run the application. Now you can see we are printing this line here. So it is being printed here. But before this line, we are printing three more lines. One is from author controllers constructor. Second is from author service control constructor, and third is from author repositories constructor. This means that all these beans are eagerly initialized because we are accessing the author controller bean here, but it has already been initialized here. If it was lazy initialized, then this line should have been printed after this line. Application context has been initialized after this line, but all three lines are being printed before uh, this line. That means application context is initializing these beans before the or at the startup time of the application. So that's one thing. And but you can see here for the author controller, this service is null, and for the author service, repository is null because we have not injected anything. So we need to do that here. So let's say inside author service, let's give some ID here. So ID will be author repository, and for this bean, ID will be author service. Now author service has one dependency for author repository. Let's create property, name will be repository, and rep will be author repository. And similarly, author controller has dependency on author service. Let's define that property here. Property name will be service, and reference will be author service. Now if we run it again, here we can see all three beans are being initialized at a startup time, and now author controller has correct service injected, and this service has repository injected. So everything is working fine. Now let's lazy initialize some beans. Let's say we want to initialize this author controller lazily. So here we just need to do lazy init. Now rerun the app. Now we can see we only see two print statements here. One from author service constructor and second is from author repository constructor. That is because author controller is being lazily initialized due to this attribute. So the constructor will be called only when it is required. And we are accessing this controller on this line. So here application context will try to create a new bean of type author controller. And for that it calls the constructor of the author controller, and that's why we see this print statement after application context initialization. Now let's lazy initialize the author repository as well. What we can do it lazy init true, and let's rerun the app. Okay. We still see that author repository is being initialized at the startup time. Why is that? That is because author service is not lazy initialized, so it will be initialized at the startup time. But this bean requires this property. And since author service is being initialized at startup time, so this reference will also get initialized at the startup time. So only if we set it lazy init, we set lazy init equal to true for author service as well, and if we run it, then we can see all three are lazily initialized. Now you can see we are lazy initializing all three beans here. If your use case is this, that you want to lazy initialize all the beans in the same metadata configuration file, then what you can do is you can define default lazy init true. Then you know you don't need to define lazy init true. All the beans will be lazily initialized. So the application context will try to lazy initialize the beans. So that is how lazy initializations of the bean works. That's it for this video. I will meet you in the next video. Until then, keep learning. Bye.